The cold air made my 7th pregnant body feel even weaker. I sat on the edge of the bed, gently rubbing my stomach, trying to endure the pain that had suddenly appeared. The house had been very quiet since my husband left for work out of town 2 weeks ago. Usually, I always slept with my husband. But that night, there was only the sound of rain, the occasional flash of lightning, and the footsteps of someone walking slowly towards my room. Knock, knock. Mom, it's Arga. I immediately turned towards the door. Arga was my son-in-law, the husband of my daughter, Siska. They were staying at my house temporarily because they were saving money to buy their own house. Are you still asleep? He asked softly from behind the door. I smiled slightly even though my body felt weak. Come in. The door opened slowly. Arga came in carrying a glass of warm milk and medicine from my obstetrician. The doctor said you shouldn't be too tired, Mom, he said softly. I stared at his face for a few seconds. I don't know why, but since my husband left, Arga has always been the first person to pay attention to me. He often helps me walk, prepares food, and even accompanies when false contractions come in the middle of the night. And that night, when I almost fell because the pain in my stomach suddenly came again, Arga immediately hugged my body so that I didn't fall to the floor. My heart was beating fast. I could feel Arga's hands trembling as he supported my body. But at the same time, from behind the slightly open bedroom window, the light from my cell phone camera suddenly turned on. Click. Someone was taking a picture of us secretly. I don't know who it was yet. But since that night, my life and my family's life began to turn into a nightmare full of slander. My name is Mira. I am 42 years old. If people saw my life from the outside, maybe they would think I was the happiest woman in this village. I have a responsible husband, a simple, comfortable house, and a daughter who is married to a good man. But no one knows. My life began to change since the doctor said I was pregnant again at an advanced age. That day was still, it's clear in my memory. I sat in the clinic examination room, holding the ultrasound results with trembling hands. The female doctor in front of me smiled slightly before saying softly, "Congratulations, ma'am. Congratulations, ma'am. You're almost 3 months pregnant, Alana." I immediately froze. Pregnant, Doc? The doctor nodded. For some reason, my chest immediately felt tight. Not because I was unhappy, but because I was afraid. At the age of 40, I never imagined I would be pregnant again after my own daughter was married. I even cried on the way home. However, unlike me, my husband was very happy when he heard the news. Mr. Darto immediately hugged me tightly while laughing. With emotion, this is a blessing from God. But I'm not young anymore. That's precisely why we have to take good care of this baby. From that day on, my husband became very attentive. He forbade me from lifting heavy objects, asked me to stop taking too many catering orders, and even always reminded me when to take my vitamins. I felt loved again like a newlywed. However, that happiness did not last long. A month later, my husband got a big project out of town for 2 months. I still remember the night before his departure. We sat together on the porch enjoying warm tea. The night air was chilly, while the sound of crickets could be heard faintly from the backyard. Mr. Darto gently held my hand. "I'm sorry I have to leave you like this." I smiled a little, though I was sad. "It's okay. I can take care of myself." But my husband still looked worried. That's why he asked our daughter, Siska, and her husband, Arga, to stay at home temporarily until he got home. "Let someone help take care of Mom," my husband told them. Siska immediately agreed, while Arga just nodded slowly, as usual. Arga is a quiet type of man. He's only 27 years old, tall, and always has a calm look on his face. Even though he's only been my son-in-law for a year, he already respects my husband and me like his own parents. At first, I wasn't very close to him. We only spoke as needed at the dinner table or when we were hanging out with Siska. But since my husband left, Arga has become the one who helps me the most. He wakes up early in the morning to carry gallons of water before leaving for work. If I look pale, he secretly buys fruit or vitamins from the pharmacy. He even volunteered to take me to prenatal checkups several times while Siska was busy working at a boutique near the market. "I'll take you," he said one morning. "I actually feel bad. Aren't you tired?" Arga just smiled a little. "It's okay. Little things like that slowly make the house feel less lonely even though my husband is far away from town." However, my pregnancy turned out to be not as easy as I imagined. The bigger I got, the weaker my body became. My feet often swelled, my back ached every night, and sometimes my stomach would suddenly hurt so much that I could hardly stand. One night, I woke up because of a very painful false contraction. I tried to walk to the kitchen to get a drink of water, but my body suddenly became unsteady. I almost fell if Arga hadn't arrived just in time to hold my arm. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked in panic. I winced in pain while holding my stomach. "Mom's stomach hurt." Arga immediately helped me sit on the kitchen chair and made warm water. That night he didn't even sleep to make sure I was okay. Since that incident, Arga has become more attentive. If I coughed even a little, he would immediately panic. If I haven't eaten, he'd be busy reminding me like a little child. Sometimes I feel bad myself. "You're too good to Mom," I said one afternoon. "Arga," I chuckled as I put my groceries on the kitchen table, because my father asked me to look after my mother. It was a simple sentence, but somehow it warmed my heart. However, without us realizing it, that small gesture of concern began to become a topic of conversation among the villagers. Neighbors began to frequently see Arga coming in and out of my room at night to deliver medicine or check on me. At first, I didn't think much of what they said. Until one afternoon, when I was buying vegetables in front of the alley, two women immediately fell silent when they saw me coming. "Hey, stop talking so loudly." But wasn't it strange? I pretended not to hear. Even though my chest was starting to feel uncomfortable, and everything got worse that rainy night. The night the electricity suddenly went out. The night the pain in my stomach came so intense that I almost fell in my room. Arga, hearing my screams, immediately ran in and hugged me to keep me from falling to the floor. But at the same time, the light from my cell phone camera suddenly flashed from behind the bedroom window. Click. Someone was secretly taking our picture. And that night, my life began to turn into a nightmare full of slander. The light from the camera from behind the window was still vivid in my head. I, who's still weak from the pain in my stomach, I could only hold Arga's arm tightly while trying to catch my breath. "Who is it?" my whisper trembled. Arga immediately turned towards the window with a tense face. Without saying much, he immediately helped me sit on the edge of the bed and then ran out of the room to check the backyard. I was alone in the dark room. The rain was getting heavier outside the house. The sound of the wind made the window curtains move slowly. Meanwhile, my chest was beating very fast with fear. A few minutes later, Arga returned, breathing heavily. "No one," he said quietly. "But I saw the camera light." I knew Arga's face looked serious. There were footprints near the back fence. Hearing that, my body immediately felt goosebumps. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. A mixture of fear and discomfort filled my mind. For some reason, I began to feel that something bad was going to happen after that incident. And my hunch turned out to be right. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house felt very strange. When I opened my phone, there were dozens of incoming messages from the village mothers group. My hands immediately went cold when I read their chat contents. No wonder her husband dared to stay out of town for so long. Gosh, it turns out that all this time close to my own son-in-law. My chest immediately tightened. I hurriedly opened the photo they sent, and that's when the world seemed to collapse before my eyes. The photo from last night when Arga hugged my body in the room had spread everywhere. The angle of the photo was deliberately taken from outside the window to make it look like we were hugging passionately. even though at that time, I almost fell because of false contractions. My tears immediately fell. Oh, God. I even had difficulty breathing seeing the comments from residents who began to insult. A few minutes later, Siska came home early from work with a panicked face. "Mom, what is this?" she asked while showing the phone screen. I immediately cried. "That's not true, son." Siska looked confused and shocked. Her gaze alternated between me and Arga, who had been silent, holding back his emotions. "I was just helping my mother last night," Arga said quietly. But the situation had already gotten worse. Neighbors started coming to the front of the house just to peek at our situation. Some even stood there gossiping loudly so that it could be heard inside the house. They had always seemed too attentive. Oui. Poor husband. I felt truly devastated. I had never been humiliated like that in my life. The one who scared me the most was my husband. I didn't know if he had seen the photo or not, and that fear finally came true that afternoon. My cell phone rang. Mr. Darto's name appeared on the screen. My hands immediately trembled. I picked up the phone slowly. "Hello?" But my husband's voice sounded very cold. "Mira, what really happened at home?" My tears immediately fell again. It was just a misunderstanding. But the photo had already spread everywhere. I tried to explain everything while crying. About false contractions, about Arga only helping me in, about someone secretly photographing us from outside the house. But the more I talked, the more I felt like my explanation sounded unreasonable. My husband was silent for a long time, until finally he said softly, "I believe you. That I'm embarrassed." Embarrassed, same as what people say. Those words felt like a knife stabbing me slowly in the chest. The phone immediately disconnected. I sat weakly on the sofa crying. Siska had to calm me down, but I could see her face was also full of stress. Meanwhile, Arga had been standing still, clenching his fists tightly. That night, the atmosphere in the house became very quiet. No one said much during dinner. Even the sound of a spoon falling on a plate was very clear in the silence. I started to feel guilty. If only Arga hadn't helped me so often. If only I hadn't asked for company. Maybe all this slander wouldn't have happened. But everything got worse when the next night I heard the sound of a rock being thrown onto the roof of the house. Crack. I was immediately shocked and held my stomach. Siska screamed softly from the living room, while Arga rushed out of the house to check on the situation. A few seconds later, the sound of running footsteps was heard from the back alley. Arga tried to chase the person, but failed. When he returned home, his face was full of emotion. "Someone deliberately destroyed this house," he said angrily. I started to get scared. Why are they doing this to us? Arga didn't answer. But that night, I saw something I'd never seen before on my son-in-law's face. Anger. And from that night on, Arga became determined to find out who had destroyed my family's good name. I could see a big change in him. Usually Arga was always calm and rarely spoke. But after our house was terrorized and the photo spread, his face almost always looked tense, sigh. He began staying up late at night on the front porch, watching the narrow alley near the house. As for me, I began to live in fear. Every time I left the house, I felt like everyone was talking about me. The stares from the residents turned sharp. Some women even deliberately stopped talking when I passed, only to whisper again as soon as I left. The most painful thing was when I heard someone say softly in the shop, heavily pregnant, yet close to my own son-in-law. That sentence made my legs immediately go weak. I went home crying all the way. That night, I locked myself in my room, unable to bear the growing shame every day. Siska tried to calm me down, but I knew she was also starting to feel depressed. Her relationship with Arga had slowly turned cold since the slander spread. They were often quiet. I even overheard them arguing in the kitchen a few times. "You're too attentive," Siska snapped at her mother. One night, Arga stared at his wife with a disappointed expression. "If it were your own mother who was sick, should I have just kept quiet? But now everyone is talking about you." I, who heard from the other side of the room, immediately started crying again. I felt like I was the cause of the destruction of my own child's household. The next day, I decided to talk to Arga. He was sitting alone on the back porch, smoking a cigarette. I walked over with a heavy heart. No. Arga quickly put out his cigarette. Mother wasn't asleep yet. I sat down slowly in the chair next to him. The night air felt cold after the rain that afternoon. "Starting tomorrow, you don't have to help me so often anymore." Arga immediately looked at me in surprise. "Why?" "I don't want your household to be destroyed because of people's gossip. Arga's face turned sad. "You believe me, right?" I immediately nodded quickly. "Of course, then. Let me find out who did it." I lowered my head slowly. Sometimes slander doesn't need proof to be believed. Arga was silent for a long time, but his gaze seemed increasingly convinced. "I don't care what people say. The important thing is that Father and Siska know that we are not wrong." Hearing that, my chest felt warm and sad at the same time. However, it turned out our problems weren't over. A few days later, an anonymous account began spreading new photos on the villager's social media manager. Photos of me sitting with Arga in the living room. Photos of Arga helping me walk home from a prenatal checkup. There was even a photo of Arga holding my shoulder when I almost fell in the yard. All the photos were deliberately taken secretly from a distance, and the captions were increasingly cruel. "Husband out of town, son-in-law substitute." I was immediately shocked when I read that sentence. My hands were shaking violently. Siska, who saw the post, immediately burst into tears. "Why are they so mean to us?" I hugged my child tightly while crying too. Meanwhile, Arga immediately left the house without saying anything. That night he came home with a face full of emotion. I knew who did this. Siska and I immediately turned around at the same time. "Who?" Arga clenched his jaw tightly. "Rendi." I immediately froze. Rendi was our neighbor, a man in his 30s who had always caused trouble in the village. He was also known for teasing women and often getting drunk at night. "But why did he do this?" I asked weakly. My face, Arga, had turned cold. "Because he had once liked Siska and was hurt when she chose to marry me." My chest immediately felt tight. So all of this wasn't just ordinary slander. Rendi had deliberately destroyed my family out of revenge. But before we could do anything, my phone suddenly rang. It was my husband's number. I immediately picked it up with trembling hands. But this time, Mr. Darto's voice sounded much colder than before. "I'm coming home tomorrow morning." My heart immediately dropped. I didn't have time to explain anything. He continued his sentence in a tone full of disappointment. "And I want to hear everything directly from you." The phone disconnected. The house was immediately silent. I stared at Arga and Siska with ragged breaths. Because for the first time, I was truly afraid that my family wouldn't be able to survive after tomorrow morning came. That night, no one could sleep. I continued to sit in the living room, hugging my stomach, which was increasingly tightening from stress. Siska cried silently in her room. Meanwhile, Arga stood guard on the front porch with a stressed face. The once warm house now felt like a foreign place. The clock ticked slowly, making the atmosphere even more suffocating. And with each passing second, the fear in my chest grew. Less. I was afraid of losing my husband. I was afraid my child's marriage would be destroyed. I was afraid the baby in my womb would be affected by all this pressure. As dawn approached, the sound of a car stopping in front of the house made my entire body tense. Mr. Darto had come home. I stood slowly, my legs trembling. The door opened. My husband entered, his face tired and his eyes red as if he hadn't slept all night. His briefcase was still slung over his shoulder, but his gaze fell directly on Arga, who was standing in the living room. The atmosphere immediately felt cold. Yes, Siska's voice was soft. But Mr. Darto didn't answer. He walked in, looking at each of us. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw such disappointment in my own husband's eyes. Dad, I said softly. I'm tired of hearing people talk. The sentence made my chest tighten. I quickly tried to explain everything again about the photos, about Randy terrorizing our house, and about Arga only helping me during my pregnancy. But before I could finish, Mr. Darto suddenly shouted loudly, "If there was nothing wrong, why did it happen? Is this it?" I immediately fell silent. My tears just fell. I'm just afraid of losing this baby, I whispered weakly, but the atmosphere was already too chaotic. Siska also cried while trying to defend Arga. Arga wasn't wrong, right? But Mr. Darto, already filled with shame and emotion, became even angrier. He glared at Arga sharply. You as a son-in-law should know your limits. That sentence made the whole room suddenly silent. Arga, who had been silent till now, finally lowered his head slowly. Dad is right. I immediately turned around quickly. I've been too close to Mom. It's not your fault. I snapped while crying. But Arga smiled bitterly. If I hadn't interfered so much, maybe none of this would have happened. Siska immediately held her husband's hand. Jeet, don't say that. But Arga slowly let go of his wife's grip. I'm leaving this house. I immediately panicked. Don't. However, Arga still walked to his room to get his bag. I tried to stand up after him, but the pain suddenly stabbed my stomach so hard. My body immediately went weak. Siska looked around in panic. Mom. I fell to the floor holding my stomach, which was in so much pain. My breathing began to become irregular. Mr. Darto immediately turned pale when he saw the blood dripping onto the floor. Oh God, Mira. The atmosphere in the house turned chaotic. Arga, who had been about to leave, immediately ran to me. Mom, look at me. Take a breath. I cried in pain while holding his shirt tightly. Okay. Without thinking, Arga immediately carried my body out of the house and to the car. Mr. Darto and Siska also panicked and cried. Throughout the trip to the hospital, the pain in my stomach became more intense. I could hear Mr. Darto's voice continuously calling my name from the back seat, while Arga drove with trembling hands and eyes full of fear. When we arrived at the emergency room, the doctor immediately took me inside. The examination room door closed. And for the first time since all this slander began, my family could only sit silently outside the room in fear of losing someone they loved. However, the biggest trial was not over yet, because a few minutes later, a nurse came out with a serious face saying, Cocok, we have to choose quick action, or the lives of the baby and the mother are both in danger.